Hello, my name is Dr. Kaye Sweetser from San Diego State University, and today I'm going to talk about everything under the sun when it comes to media relations and media pitching and actually getting that media and then doing the interview and following up. All media 101 from start to finish. All right, let's go ahead and dig in here. The first thing that you have to do before you even go out into the world to try to get media coverage is to understand what your message is as an organization. So you go through this process to develop messaging for your organization. Typically, I like to use qualitative interviews in order to understand what people know about my organization or my issue, what resonates with them, what they don't know. I understand the holes that I need to fill, and I also really get clued in to the language that they use that help them connect to the things that I want them to understand and know and act on with regard to my organization or issue. I would also look at things like competitors to understand what they're saying and do a pretty big media assessment in order to understand the share of voice and the types of words that are being used when it comes to my issue. And in this case, again, I don't just want to understand what it is that is being said, but I want to identify what the gaps are, what these holes are that my messaging can come in and to say something new about. When I'm writing my messaging, in my opinion, I think your messages should be short little bullets, fragments. I don't want to write a message that is so full of weasel words and buzzwords, long sentences, that when people look at them, they get nervous that I've got to remember these 3 paragraphs of information before I go talk to the media. That's a lot of pressure. Instead, if I can write my messaging in very simple phrases, in short bullets that are not overwhelming sentences, then that would lead the person that is eventually going to be talking to the media the feeling and the freedom that they can internalize what we as an organization want to say, and then they can use their own words and talk about it authentically. That's the goal. That's the goal, is that we have somebody in the media who is talking about our organization, talking about our issue in a way that is natural to them, not some political kind of talking head that just says all the right buzzwords and people don't even really understand what's being said. We want people to be real, and the best way that we can set up the people that we put in front of the media to be real is for us to keep those messages really confined into short bullets and fragments. So when I'm working with communicators and I'm asking them to develop messaging, I don't want to see long sentences. I want short, simple fragments. And they can be arranged in themes and, sometimes coy or lofty kinds of buckets, but the actual messages themselves, the talking points, if you will, those are always going to be simple, to the point, and really hit, if you will. I'm going to avoid weasel words. There's a book that I love that's called Writing Without Bullshit. It's very similar to something that was really popular 30 or more years ago called On Writing Well. And it's just the new fun version of it. But in Writing Without Bullshit, the author really walks us through understanding that the biggest barrier to communication are things when we're not saying what we think, right? So if you can be direct, you can avoid passive voice, you can say the words that you want to say and be real, then you can communicate. So avoid weasel words as a part of your message creation. The next step that we have after you have your messaging is approved, you're good to go, and now you want to go out and start to kind of think about, how am I going to get this out in the world? I don't want to put the cart before the horse, which is to like get media interested and then be like, oh, scrambling. Now I have to figure out who in my organization I'm going to put in front of the media. So my next step, I prefer to actually create the media training materials based on the messaging. So I'm going to do some kind of a media training guide. It might be a PowerPoint deck. It might be like a manual or a couple of handouts or something like that. But I'm going to create some sort of a training product that I can run through with my subject matter experts when they are needed to go in front of the media. And so in this media training set of materials, I'm going to make sure that I'm explaining to them things like journalism news values, why a journalist would care to cover a topic or an issue in the first place. I'm going to talk about timeliness, prominence, human interest, proximity, source credibility, conflict, drama. These are the driving factors of when a journalist looks at something and says, is this news? Is this worth, covering? That they consider. And so I want to make sure that as a public relations practitioner, that I'm delivering something to a journalist that meets that sniff test, right? So in my media training materials, I'm also going to talk to my subject matter experts about what news is so that they can better understand, so that they can internalize this as a part of their process when they're talking to the media. I'm going to talk to my SMEs, subject matter experts, about the different types of media that there are, right? And so what a broadcast journalist needs is going to be very different than what a magazine print journalist needs. And the way that you prepare for those interviews are going to be different. And the way that they use the information that you give them is going to be different. And then you have podcasters, YouTubers, social media folks, newspaper. There's just the whole gamut in here. So I'm going to make sure that in my media training materials, I am talking about all of these different types of media so that my person who's being trained can understand how you sort of flex and prepare the best kind of content for each of these different types of media. I'm going to talk to my subject matter experts about different levels of attribution so that they don't get sideways on this, right? And so we have off the record, which I prefer to not use. We have off the record, we have on background, and we have, of course, on the record, which is pretty much expected in most cases that we're dealing with. But I want to make sure that they understand that these levels of attribution are very specific rules in which the journalist is going to operate. And if it's a traditional journalist, somebody working for a newspaper or a broadcast entity, somebody who has a journalism degree, they're going to be pretty formal and probably say, this is on the record, etc. However, if it's not a professionally trained journalist, if it's a podcaster or something of that nature, and you're providing information that's not for attribution, but helping them informing their story, you want to make sure that you understand what those different levels of attribution are and that you're communicating what that expectation is for the journalist in there. So I want to make sure that in my media training guide, I've talked about levels of attribution as a part of that. When we get past all of the, what is the media? How do I work with them? What are these different rules and values that we have? And when I get into the heart of what I want my subject matter experts to talk about, I help them develop what I like to call their 3 commercials, right? And so with their 3 commercials, they're not actually commercials. It's just a snippet of a way to think of it, is I want them to think of only 3 things, limited to 3 things that the person in the interview is going to touch on throughout the interview. I don't want to set an entire smorgasbord buffet of information out for the journalist and let the journalist make unhealthy incorrect decisions about what goes in their piece that they're doing. No, I want to be very specific. I want to have all my macros down tight where I'm being really explicit about what the story is. And so I help my subject matter experts in media training understand what 3 commercials they want to get across. And I ensure that we're not trying to tackle too much as a part of one particular media engagement in there. So after they have their 3 commercials, then I want to walk them through a role play scenario. And this is literally when I get out the camera or get out my iPhone and I put it in their face and I ask them the question just like the journalist would do. Because in theory, like, you're looking at the piece of paper, you understand what your 3 commercials are, you understand what you're going to say, you're like, okay, I could figure this out. But when you're actually asked that question, you might be deer in headlights. And so I want them to be deer in headlights and to have this level of discomfort and think through, how am I going to say this? What am I going to do when it's in this safe womb of training with me? So I want to make sure that they go through this process where I'm asking these questions that a journalist is likely going to ask so that they can coordinate and organize their thoughts so that they can tell the story that they're supposed to tell when they do this interview. Now, after that role play exercise, I'm going to give constructive but immediate feedback. I need them to know not only what they did wrong, what I need them to work on, like no filler words or uncoordinated or off topic, whatever. I need them to know not only what they did wrong, but I really want to emphasize the things also that they did well, so that I can ensure that they're doing that again. So you want to give immediate feedback as a part of this role play exercise scenario in here. When it comes to preparing your subject matter expert, you want the person to feel like, okay, I can do this, but you don't want them to feel too relaxed and too comfortable and like they don't even need you, they don't need to prepare, because everybody needs to prepare before they talk to the media. They need to ground themselves, think of the message that they want, and then ensure that they are giving it that due that it takes in order to perform and to be authentic as they're doing it, right? So you want to make sure that people feel better about doing media engagement, but you definitely don't want somebody who's so comfortable that they're like, okay, yeah, I could do it all, right now. Okay, great. So the next step, you've media trained somebody. So now you've got these people sort of waiting in the stable for you to call on, and it's time to start doing your pitching. When you're pitching the media, you really want to be specific about who it is that you're reaching out to. You don't want to send a mass blast email pitch to every single journalist that you find in Muck Rack or Cision or whatever. You want to make sure that you're doing the research to find the absolute right best person to cover this particular story that you're pitching. So in doing that, you have to understand the things that they've covered before, the things that they're interested in. You want to look at their LinkedIn. You want to see if they're on Facebook or Instagram. And I mean, don't be creepy about it, but understand who these people are as people, right? And then create a pitch that could only be written as an email to that person. So if you are sending the exact same email to every journalist that you're pitching, you're doing it wrong. And if you say, oh, I did personalize it because I said, hey, I saw your article, insert link here, it was great, maybe you should cover this. Like, that's not personalization. That is so tired of a formula, and it's so transparent that you don't really care about the journalist, that you're just trying to pretend that you are interested in their work, or you found this one article through a quick Google. That is Bush League. You don't want that, right? So you want to make sure that you are connecting to the journalist and that you truly understand what they cover, what their audience is interested in, and what their audience is going to get from this media coverage when you create your pitch for the journalist. Pitch should be short. I've seen folks like the This Is How You Pitch book says a pitch should be 150 words. Folks like Michael Smart say that it can be a little longer if it's really well tweaked and really, specific in there. So I would go with shorter to start the conversation. You don't need to say everything at once. I would go shorter to start the conversation, and then you can add in more information in here. Media don't want to hear about all the other people who have covered this story before. Because if you know the journalistic news values, then you know it's not news. Like, somebody else has already told the story. Why would I want to tell it? You want to go to them with something new and interesting. So I find it bad taste to send a journalist a link of someone else's work who has talked about that particular story or who has done an interview with my person before. So not everybody feels that way. That's just how I feel. So take it or leave it, right? You want to build your pitch around the journalistic news values. You want to understand kind of what news value you're putting out there. The idea that they should do the story because it's interesting isn't enough. You have to explain why it's interesting. And most often it's got to be connected to whoever their audience is, why their audience cares about this or needs this. Right? Because otherwise it just looks like you want them to do the story because you're the PR person and you want them to do your job, and just please write on this. That's not very helpful for them to be able to understand how it fits into the people that they serve, the people that they're writing for, talking to, whatever it is with the media that they communicate through. So you really want to hit on why their audience cares. When you come to the end of it, one of the things I love from Michael Smart's webinars is he talks about a really strong closing call to action. And so you do not want to have a call to action close, which is like, let me know if you're interested. Like, nobody's going to let you know because nobody's interested, right? And you don't want to kind of really like leave it up to them. You want to be more like, I'll call you on Thursday to schedule this, or my expert's available on Wednesday. Are you free in the morning? Right? Like, strong, bold call to action. I like to end my pitches with that strong, bold call to action, not let me know if you want more stuff, right? That's just a womp, womp, womp kind of an end. You do want to avoid things like saying, see attached. Nobody wants to get an attachment these days. So, you can do that later on, not the initial pitch. You want to avoid having like press release or pitch, I think, in the subject line. You do want to have a really good subject line, because that's half the battle, is that, think of what your inbox looks like. It times that by 100, and that's what a journalist's inbox looks like. So you want to make sure that whatever it is that you're sending with this unknown name that they've never seen before, potentially, that you can get through and get them to open up the email. So you've got to have a subject line that makes sense, and it doesn't need to be cutesy. It doesn't have to read like spam. But if you've done your homework, if you've really tailored it and you know what they care about, what they're interested in, all these other pieces, then writing the subject line, you're going to just win half the battle by getting them to open it up, because you're going to understand who they are. Because this is why every single pitch is written for one person, not something that you repeat out to all of the people that are on your list. So, like I said, love the information that Michael Smart puts out there. He does a ton of different webinars throughout the year. I look at them for free, typically through Muck Rack or some of his other partners that he works with, but he is top notch and is really descriptive and actually shows pitches when he goes through his webinars. So I suggest, seeking out some of that material. When you have done your pitch, then you can follow up. Of course, I would follow up, up to 2 times. And my feeling is that if somebody is ghosting you, you didn't write a good pitch. You were not personal and understanding what they need and what they're interested in. You were just following a tired old formula. So if they're ghosting you, it's because you didn't do a good enough job. So you got to get in there and you got to understand who you're talking to. Of course, build those relationships. That'll make it a lot easier for you to get through. And make sure that you understand what the journalist cares about, what their audience cares about, and then deliver it, right? That's the best way. So you've done this pitch, you hear back from the journalist, and the skies have opened, and birds are singing, everything's amazing, unicorns are popping out of bushes because they want to do an interview. Fantastic. So we got to schedule the interview. You're going to work with the client in order to schedule the interview. You want to understand what the subject matter expert's availability is. Thankfully, you've already done the media training of the subject matter expert. And so if the person needs to, jump on a call tomorrow, then you're not feeling rushed as a part of the process, right? And so this is why my media training happened before the pitch ever happened. I personally like to create a one-pager for the person who's going to be talking to the media. And this helps focus them on this particular absolute, conversation that they're going to have with this journalist. So in this one pager, it's going to have at the very top, it's going to have the logo of the news organization that the person is with. It's going to have a photo of the journalist. It's going to have the journalist's name, the journalist's pronouns. It's going to have a little bio of the journalist in there. And then on like some sidebar areas, I might have, recent coverage that particular journalist has done either on my issue, in my industry, just relevant stuff so that the person who's doing the interview can understand like how this person, writes, the perspective that this person brings. And what coverage kind of looks like, it helps the person understand how they are going to fit into this story that will eventually come out from this media engagement. I also tend to put on there like how we're going to connect for the interview. So here's the phone number that you call in, here's the date and the time, and, all this kind of stuff. I prefer that the interviews that I coordinate are done on a phone bridge like Zoom because I can record it then. I can be there to listen in. And I don't want to give out my subject matter expert's phone number to a journalist because then the journalist has no need for me, the PR person, and can just contact this person, anytime, right? So I'm facilitating, I'm coordinating. I'm going to send calendar invites, a separate one to my subject matter expert, attaching in my calendar invite, my little one pager and any other things I need to make sure the person understands. And then I'm going to send a separate calendar invite that doesn't have that attachment to the journalist, letting them know like, hey, here's the bio, here's the photo, here's company logo, like all whatever other things they may need attached to that. And so, I might have in my calendar like 3 different calendar invites all for the same event because they're going to different people because each person has a different need of things that they need to know. But it's my preference that I actually facilitate it and that I don't just connect them and just hope it goes well. Okay. So now we're into conducting the interview. So with conducting the interview, I'm the one who talks first, right? So my subject matter expert has already called in, they're on mute. And then the journalist calls in and I welcome the journalist. I introduce them to the subject matter expert. And then I make sure that everybody knows that the call is going to be recorded. I explain why the call is going to be recorded. And then I let them know that I'm going to go on mute. I'm just going to be in the background and I'm going to take notes about anything. If, they mention something that I need to send a follow-up or a resource or whatever, I'll make sure, because I'm listening in on the conversation, I'll make sure that the journalist gets that immediately after the call, right? So then you go on mute. If it's a video call, you turn your video off and you're just there in note-taking mode. So you really want to listen closely to the conversation. You're not going to interrupt anything. In most cases, you're just going to let the conversation continue. If there's something that was missaid by either the journalist or by your subject matter expert, you put that kind of in your notes of something you want to address either at the end of the call, if there's an opportunity, or on the one-on-one with the journalist follow-up. However, it seems like it would work best, but you always want to correct the record, obviously, but you're not going to interrupt the conversation. You're not going to interrupt the flow in order to do that. If they mention, like, let's say your subject matter expert was talking about, some project that is tangentially related to this and blah, blah, blah. And you're like, oh, I have a fact sheet on that project. Then you make a little note and you follow up and you send the fact sheet of the project to the journalist afterward, right? So you make sure that as you're actively listening to this conversation, so that when they mention something, that you're gonna take notes so that you can deliver all of these other extra pieces that the journalist might need to help the journalist have a factual and correct version of whatever your organization's story is, or how you're talking about the issue in there. So when it's over, sometimes they'll just hang up, sometimes they'll bring you back on and you can correct the record there, or you can say, hey journalist, I'm going to send you this, and this. And then they'll be like, oh, wow, that's great. Yeah, fantastic. You need to then obviously do that immediately. After the interview, this is my next phase. After the interview, privately, not in front of the journalist, not in front of anybody else, privately, you want to immediately, as soon as possible, give your subject matter expert feedback. And you want to tell them how they did. You want to tell them how they can improve on that, right? And so you'll provide that feedback for them so that you're really building somebody who is going to be your go-to person that you can count on for every media engagement. You do want to send a more formalized kind of after action email or report to the client to let them know a summary of what was covered in the interview. You definitely want to point out if you think that there's going to be any crisis that results from this, or any kind of misinformation or inaccuracy or something. If there's an issue that transpired, or something you're a little worried about, then you want to make sure you call it out in this after action to the client so that they know that it's coming. You want to make sure that they understand how you're going to follow up with the journalist afterward, the things that you're going to send the journalist, etc. And you want to let them know, when do you think this is going to run? How is this going to run? Is this going to be broadcast only, or are they going to do it on the website first, or, all these different pieces in there. So you want to disclose all of this, behind the scenes kind of information to the client in a concise, formal type of after action. Email is fine, but an after action report type of a deal. And when the piece comes out, you want to be constantly looking for the piece. Do not ask the journalist to send the piece to you. If you have a good relationship with them, that's great. But it's not their job to send you the link, right? So make sure that you have a system in place to constantly be checking for when this is going to come out, and that you get the link and that you share it with the client as soon as possible. And then you want to, of course, monitor all social media and all conversation about it so that you can see how it's playing, whether it went well or whether it didn't go well. So I can't say that that's everything that there is to know or to think about with regard to media relations, but that's sort of the life cycle, as I see it, in a very consolidated way, of Media Relations 101. So I hope that this video was helpful for you and that you feel inspired and now confident to go out and to do all the media relations amazingness that you have been trained to do. So happy pitching.